Everyone in my family ignored my grandmother for years, sending the occasional text message, skipping her birthday, forgetting she existed until it was convenient to remember, and none of them had any idea that every single slight was being written down in a notebook she kept beside her bed, until the day her lawyer read that notebook out loud in front of all of us. My name is Jasmine. I was 29 years old the year my grandmother Bernice started declining. Working as a middle school teacher and living in a small apartment 15 minutes from her house, close enough that I never had an excuse not to visit, and far enough from the rest of my family, both physically and emotionally, that I'd stopped expecting them to visit her at all. My mother Cheryl lived across the state, 2.5 hours away, a distance she cited constantly as the reason she couldn't come more often. Even though she made that same drive twice a year for a spa weekend with her sorority sisters. My Uncle Reggie lived 20 minutes from Grandma Bernice, closer than I did, and ran a successful contracting business, but somehow he was always too busy for a phone call, let alone a visit. My cousin Destiny, who Grandma had practically raised during her teenage years while my aunt worked overnight shifts, had moved to Atlanta and hadn't called in over a year. Grandma Bernice never complained about any of it out loud, not to me anyway. She was the kind of woman who believed complaining was a waste of good breath, a lesson she'd learned growing up the daughter of a preacher in rural Mississippi before moving north as a young bride in the 1960s. She'd worked as a seamstress for over 30 years, first in a garment factory and later out of her own home, building a small but steady clientele of women in the neighborhood who trusted her with wedding dresses, church suits, funeral clothes, anything that needed to be done right. She never made much money doing it, but she never went without either, and by the time I came along, she owned her modest house outright and had a small but respectable savings account she never talked about. I started visiting her every Wednesday after school let out when I was still in college, mostly because I loved her cooking and her stories, and somewhere along the way it turned into something I couldn't imagine my week without. We'd sit in her sewing room while she worked on whatever project she had going, and she'd tell me about Mississippi, about my grandfather who'd passed before I was born, about the church she'd attended for over 50 years, about the neighborhood the way it used to be before half the houses on her block got torn down for new development. I never once thought of those visits as an obligation. They were simply the best part of my week, every single week for 6 years straight. When her memory started slipping in small ways, forgetting where she'd put her sewing scissors, repeating the same story twice in one conversation, I noticed before anyone else did, because I was the only one paying close enough attention to notice at all. The diagnosis came 8 months later. Early-stage dementia layered on top of a heart condition that had been quietly worsening for years, and the doctor told us gently that her decline would likely accelerate faster than any of us wanted to hear. I remember sitting in that doctor's office alone because nobody else in my family had been able to make it that day, taking notes on my phone so I could explain everything to a family that mostly wouldn't ask. The next 2 years became a slow, painful education in exactly who my family really was. I took over managing her medications, coordinating with her doctors, driving her to appointments she could no longer manage alone. I hired a part-time home aide using money from my own modest teacher's salary because Grandma Bernice's savings, while respectable, weren't enough to cover full-time care, and none of my relatives ever once offered to contribute, despite each of them making considerably more money than I did. My mother sent a check twice, each for $100, accompanied by a text saying she wished she could do more, but things were tight, sent from a phone number linked to an Instagram account that posted vacation photos from Cancun the same month. Uncle Reggie visited exactly 3 times in 2 years. Each visit lasted less than half an hour, and each time, he spent most of it asking Grandma Bernice questions about the house, about whether she'd thought about what would happen to it eventually, about whether she'd considered signing something over to make things simpler down the road. She always answered him politely, the way she answered everyone, but I watched something in her expression tighten every single time he brought it up, a kind of quiet weariness that took me a while to fully understand. Destiny called twice in 2 years. Both times asking to borrow money, both times promising to visit soon, neither visit ever materializing. Grandma Bernice sent her $300 the first time without hesitation, the woman who had basically raised her for years during her teenage summers, and never once mentioned it again, not even when Destiny didn't call to say thank you. "You're the only one who still comes on Wednesdays," Grandma told me one evening. About a year and a half into her decline, sitting in her favorite chair with a lap quilt over her knees, her hands, once so steady with a needle and thread, now trembling slightly as she held her cup of tea. "Your mother sends a card sometimes. Reggie stops by when he wants something. Destiny calls when she needs money. But you're the one who's actually here, baby, every single week. I see that even on the days my mind isn't working quite right." I told her that was because Wednesday was still the best part of my week, and I meant it completely, even as her decline made those visits harder, even as she sometimes forgot my name mid-sentence and called me by her sister's name instead, even as the sewing room grew quieter because her hands could no longer manage the delicate work she'd loved her entire life. I kept showing up anyway, because showing up was never something I did for a reward. It was simply what love looked like when it was actually real. What none of us knew, not even me, was that Grandma Bernice had been keeping a small spiral notebook on her nightstand for the past several years, writing in it whenever her mind was clear enough, documenting things in the careful, deliberate handwriting of a woman who understood that memory couldn't always be trusted, but paper could. I found out about the notebook's true purpose only after she was gone. But by then it was too late to ask her about any of it, and I've spent a lot of nights since wondering what it cost her to keep writing those entries, year after year, watching her family's absence become a permanent record. She passed away on a rainy Sunday morning in early spring, quietly, in her sleep, in the home health aide's care after I had left the night before, feeling that particular kind of guilt that comes from not being there for the exact moment, even after being there for nearly everything else. I got the call before 6 in the morning and drove to her house in the rain, sitting in my car outside for almost 20 minutes before I could make myself go inside, before I could make myself call my mother and tell her that her own mother had died without her. My mother's reaction on the phone was the kind of grief that seemed to arrive only once it had an audience, loud and dramatic, though I noticed she still asked. Within the first 5 minutes of that call, whether I knew what Grandma Bernice's plans had been for the house. I hung up shortly after that, unable to process both my own grief and my mother's strange priorities in the same conversation. The funeral was held the following week at the same small Baptist church Grandma Bernice had attended faithfully for over 50 years. The church where she'd sewn choir robes and funeral clothes and wedding dresses for 3 generations of the congregation. The church that felt, more than any building I'd ever stepped into, like it actually belonged to her. My mother wanted a bigger venue at first, something downtown with more space for what she called the extended family and community. But the pastor gently reminded her that Bernice had specifically requested, years earlier, that her funeral be held right there, in the small sanctuary she'd loved her entire adult life, and for once nobody argued with that. I arrived early, wanting a few quiet minutes before the crowd showed up, and instead I found my mother, Uncle Reggie, and Destiny already there near the front pews, dressed in expensive black clothing that none of them had worn to visit Grandma Bernice while she was alive, their voices low but unmistakably charged with something that had nothing to do with grief. I heard the word house. I heard the word savings. I heard Destiny mention something about the sewing machine collection Grandma had built over decades, wondering aloud what it might be worth to a collector. I found a seat near the back and stayed there through the entire service, listening to the pastor talk about Bernice's faith, her generosity, the way she'd quietly sewn free choir robes for children whose families couldn't afford them, a fact I hadn't fully known until that moment. Another piece of her I was only now discovering after it was too late to thank her for it properly. My mother gave remarks about how close they had always been, how much she'd cherished their relationship, and I sat there trying to remember the last time my mother had actually called Grandma Bernice just to talk, not to ask about the house, not to check in briefly before hanging up, just to talk. And I genuinely could not remember a single instance in the past several years. After the burial, everyone gathered at my mother's house for the repast, and the mood in that living room felt less like mourning and more like an audition for an inheritance, the kind of restless energy where people check their phones a little too often while pretending to be present. A lawyer named Mr. Ashford arrived about an hour into the gathering, carrying a briefcase and a thick folder. And I watched my family's posture change the instant he walked through the door, the way certain animals go still right before they strike. "Jasmine," my mother said, pulling me aside near the hallway, her voice dropping into the particular tone she used when she wanted to manage a situation without appearing to be managing anything at all. "I think it might be simpler if you didn't sit in on the reading. This is really something for the immediate family to handle. And I don't want things to feel complicated." I stared at her for a long moment, waiting for even a flicker of self-awareness to cross her face. It never came. "I visited her every single week for 6 years," I said quietly. "I don't understand why that wouldn't make me immediate family." "Of course you're family, technically," she said in the exact tone people use when they've already decided your feelings don't factor into the outcome. But let's be realistic. Jasmine, Mama, was a practical woman. She understood how these things work. There's no need to make this more complicated than it has to be. Uncle Reggie overheard the tail end of it and wandered over, coffee in hand, his tone casual in a way that somehow made it worse. "Yeah, Jazz, maybe just give us some space for this part. It's really for the people who are actually going to be handling everything. No offense, but you know how it is." I wanted to leave right then. I wanted to walk out of that house and never look back, to let them have their briefcase and their performance of grief and simply remove myself from the entire situation permanently. But something kept my feet rooted to that hallway floor, some quiet certainty building in the back of my mind that there was more to this story than any of them understood yet. "I'm staying," I said. And I walked past my mother into the living room where the rest of the family had already claimed the good seats. The room went quiet when I sat down. My mother exchanged a tight look with Uncle Reggie. Destiny rolled her eyes but said nothing further, already reaching for her phone. Nobody wanted to make a scene in front of the lawyer, not yet anyway. "Before I begin, Mr. Ashford said, settling into the armchair that had clearly been Bernice's favorite. Worn soft in the particular shape of a woman who'd sat there every evening for decades with her sewing in her lap, I need to explain that Bernice made some very specific requests regarding this reading, requests she put in writing roughly 18 months ago and updated as recently as 3 months before she passed. A ripple of unease moved through the room. My mother's fingers tightened around the strap of her purse. Uncle Reggie shifted forward in his seat. In addition to her formal will, Mr. Ashford continued, your mother kept a personal notebook that she specifically asked to be read into the record today in full before any discussion of the estate itself begins. She was very clear about the order in which this needed to happen. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a small, worn spiral notebook, its cover soft and creased from years of handling, and the sight of it seemed to hit something in me immediately. A recognition of an object I'd seen on her nightstand 100 times without ever once asking what was inside it. I'll read the relevant entries as she left them, Mr. Ashford said, opening to a page marked with a slip of paper. The room fell into a silence so complete I could hear the rain still tapping lightly against the windows outside. March 14th, he read, his voice steady and measured. Cheryl called today, first time in 6 weeks. Talked for 11 minutes, asked about the house within the first 2 minutes, told me she loves me before hanging up. I believe she means it, even when it doesn't always look like it. My mother's face had gone very still. June 2nd, Mr. Ashford continued. Reggie stopped by for 20 minutes, third visit this year. Asked again about the deed, about whether I'd thought about putting his name on it in case anything happens to me suddenly. I told him I'd think about it. I have thought about it. My answer remains no. Uncle Reggie's jaw tightened visibly, but he said nothing. September 9th, Mr. Ashford read. Destiny called asking for $400 for car repairs. I sent it without asking questions, the way I always have, the way I did when she was 16 and needed someone steady in her life more than she needed anything else. She did not call to say she received it. I do not believe she remembers that I raised her most of 2 summers while her own mother worked nights. Destiny's confident posture finally cracked, her eyes fixed on the floor. There is one entry I want to read in full, Mr. Ashford said, turning several pages ahead, dated just 4 months before Bernice passed, written according to the date on a Wednesday evening. He paused, glancing around the room before continuing. Jasmine came again today. Like she has every Wednesday for 6 years now, rain or shine, good days and the harder days when my mind isn't cooperating the way it used to. She never once asks me about the house. She never once asks me about money. She sat with me for 3 hours today and I dozed off twice, and when I woke up both times, she was still there, reading quietly, waiting for me. I don't think she knows how much that means to a woman my age. Having someone simply wait for you instead of rushing off the moment you close your eyes. I felt my chest tighten, tears already gathering, though the hardest part hadn't even come yet. I have decided, Mr. Ashford continued reading from the notebook, that when the time comes, I want the truth told plainly, without softening it for anyone's comfort. My family, most of them, treated my final years like an inconvenience to be managed from a distance. One granddaughter treated them like they mattered. I intend for my estate to reflect that truth honestly, regardless of how uncomfortable that honesty might be for the people who need to hear it most. He set the notebook down gently and opened the formal will itself. In accordance with these wishes, he said, Bernice has left the house on Cypress Street, her savings accounts, and her sewing equipment collection, valued altogether at approximately $640,000, entirely to her granddaughter, Jasmine. The number, though far smaller than some inheritances, hit that room with the same force any number that size might, because for people who had been calculating and waiting, even part of it felt like something being taken directly from their hands. To my daughter Cheryl, my son Reggie, and my granddaughter Destiny, Mr. Ashford read. I leave $25,000 each, along with my hope that this prompts real reflection on what it actually means to show up for the people who raised you, rather than simply waiting for what they might eventually leave behind. The silence that followed felt endless, then my mother's voice cut through it, sharp and trembling. "This can't be right," she said, standing up too quickly, her chair scraping against the floor. She had dementia. She wasn't in her right mind these past few years, and everyone in this room knows that. Bernice was evaluated by 2 independent physicians when these documents were finalized, including the most recent update 3 months before her passing. Mr. Ashford replied calmly. Both confirmed she had full capacity to understand and direct her own affairs at the time these decisions were made. The evaluations are part of the estate file, should you wish to review them. "This is completely unfair," Uncle Reggie said, rising to his feet. "She gets the house because she visited on Wednesdays. I'm her son. Destiny is her granddaughter too. This is our family." "You visited 3 times in 2 years," I said quietly, and it was the first thing I'd said aloud since the notebook reading began. My voice shook, but I kept going anyway. "Each time you asked about the deed within the first few minutes. I was there every single Wednesday for 6 years. Don't stand there and act like something was stolen from you." Uncle Reggie's jaw tightened, but he had no response, and everyone in that room understood it, including him. "You don't get to act wounded," I continued, feeling something inside me finally breaking loose after years of staying quiet, of watching my family's absence get quietly excused time and time again. "None of you sat with her. None of you learned her medication schedule. None of you paid for the home aide I had to hire out of my own salary because her savings weren't enough, and none of you offered $1 toward it. And now you want to act like you're the ones who were wronged here. You always acted like you were better than the rest of us," my mother said, her voice trembling with something that wasn't quite grief and wasn't quite guilt, but sat uncomfortably close to both. "Playing the devoted granddaughter, making the rest of us look bad by comparison." "I wasn't trying to make anyone look bad," I said, and I meant every word of it. I was trying to be there for a woman who was slowly losing her memory and still remembered every single Wednesday that I was coming. That's all this ever was for me. My mother's voice dropped into something quieter and more controlled. "We'll be contesting this. I hope you understand that. No court is going to uphold a document written by a woman with a dementia diagnosis, notebook or not." Mr. Ashford, entirely unbothered, reached into his briefcase and produced a second folder. "You're welcome to try," he said evenly, though I should mention that Bernice anticipated this exact possibility as well. The will includes a no contest clause. Any beneficiary who formally challenges this document in court automatically forfeits their inheritance entirely, including the $25,000 each of you has currently been left. I'd strongly recommend consulting your own attorney before proceeding, but I can assure you, Bernice was extremely thorough, right down to the notebook you just heard read aloud. The room fell quiet again, the anger in it slowly recalculating itself against the risk of losing even what little remained on the table. I stood up slowly, my legs unsteady beneath me. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel the satisfaction I might have expected walking into that living room hours earlier. Mostly, I felt hollow and exhausted and strangely sad, like a truth had finally been spoken aloud that none of us would ever be able to take back. "I don't want a war over this," I said, looking around the room at faces that had once felt like family and now felt like strangers wearing clothes I recognized. She didn't leave this to me because she wanted to punish anyone. She left it to me because I was there. I'm not going to turn this into something uglier than it already is just because the rest of you are upset. "How generous of you," my mother said bitterly, though the words came out weaker than she probably intended. I didn't respond to that. There wasn't anything left to say that would change how she felt about me, and honestly, after everything, I was finally too tired to keep trying. I left my mother's house that evening and drove straight to Grandma Bernice's place on Cypress Street, the house that now technically belonged to me, though it didn't feel real yet and wouldn't for a long time. I sat in the sewing room in her old chair, the one with the worn cushion shaped by decades of use, and I let myself cry properly for the first time since she died. Not because of the money, not because of the fight with my family. I cried because I missed her, plainly and completely, the particular kind of missing that leaves a hole shaped exactly like the person who's gone. A few days later, going through her things, I found the rest of that notebook, entries going back nearly 8 years, most of them small, ordinary observations about her days, but scattered throughout were more entries about each of us, honest, unflinching, sometimes painful to read. Sometimes surprisingly generous, even toward the family members who had disappointed her most. Near the very back, dated only a week before she passed, in handwriting shakier than any of the earlier entries, I found one final line meant only for me. Jasmine doesn't know I've been keeping this notebook or why. I hope when she finally understands, she knows it was never really about punishing anyone. It was about making sure the truth existed somewhere permanent. In case my own memory failed before I got the chance to say it out loud myself. She was the truth every single Wednesday. I hope she carries that with her long after I'm gone. I closed the notebook and held it against my chest for a long time, sitting alone in that quiet sewing room, letting the silence settle around me the way it used to when she was still alive to share it with me. In the weeks that followed, my family mostly stopped speaking to me altogether. My mother sent one final message calling me calculating and manipulative, which felt darkly ironic considering everything that had actually happened. Uncle Reggie stopped answering my calls entirely. Destiny posted vague messages online about greed and betrayal that everyone who knew our family understood were aimed directly at me. I didn't fight any of them on it. I didn't try to defend myself or explain or beg for a forgiveness I hadn't actually done anything wrong to need. I used part of the inheritance to pay off my remaining student loans and moved into the house on Cypress Street, keeping the sewing room exactly as she'd left it, her half-finished projects still sitting in the same places she'd left them. I donated most of her sewing machine collection to a community center downtown that teaches trade skills to teenagers. The way I imagined she would have wanted, rather than selling it off to a collector the way Destiny had once suggested at the funeral. I still see her old customers sometimes, women in their 60s and 70s now, stopping by the community center to ask if anyone kept up her patterns, her measurements book, the small handwritten notes she used to leave inside finished garments with a stitch of thread and a folded slip of paper wishing the wearer well. I kept all of it. I framed one of those notes and hung it in the sewing room, right above her old chair, where I can see it every time I sit down. Some evenings, I still sit in that sewing room with a cup of tea, listening to the quiet the way she used to, and I think about how strange it is that it took a spiral notebook kept in secret for 8 years to finally make my family see what had been true the entire time. I think about how much courage it must have taken her to keep writing those entries honestly, year after year, documenting her own family's neglect in careful, patient handwriting, never once complaining about it out loud to any of us while she was still alive to say it plainly. People sometimes ask me if I feel guilty about the inheritance, about the way it fractured what was left of my family. I've turned that question over more nights than I can count. Usually in that quiet sewing room after the sun goes down, and the answer I keep arriving at is always the same. I didn't fracture my family. Their own choices did that quietly over years, one skipped visit at a time, $100 check at a time, one conversation that turned to property before it ever turned to how she was actually feeling. The notebook didn't create the distance between us. It simply proved a distance that had already existed for a very long time. in her own careful handwriting, undeniable and permanent. My grandmother spent the final years of her life mostly surrounded by absence, dressed up as excuses, distance, busy schedules, and one granddaughter who simply refused to let her fade into loneliness while her mind was still trying to hold onto everything she'd ever known. In the end, she made sure the truth would outlive her own memory, and she made sure it would finally be spoken aloud, in a room full of people who could no longer pretend they hadn't heard it. I think often about how much discipline that must have taken, writing those entries honestly for 8 straight years without ever once softening them for her own comfort, without ever letting herself pretend the neglect wasn't happening simply because pretending would have been easier. There's a particular kind of strength in choosing to see your own life clearly, even when what you see disappoints you. And I don't think I ever fully understood how strong she really was until I read that notebook cover to cover, alone in the quiet of the house she left me. And maybe that's the part of this story that still keeps me up some nights, more than the inheritance itself ever could. It was never about the money for her. It was about being remembered, being shown up for, being treated like she still mattered even as her own memory started slipping away from her. So I'll leave you with the same question I still don't have a clean answer for myself. If you had been in my family's position, hearing your own neglect read back to you in the careful handwriting of someone who never once complained about it while she was alive, would you have been able to admit the truth about your own absence? Or would you have done exactly what they did and blamed the person who actually showed up instead of ever facing the person staring back at you in the mirror?